So good day, everyone. This is Alexander M. Kabangbang from Bachelor of Secondary Education, a major in Social Studies, and this is my report in Ed 304, External Environment and Accountability of Schools. So, what is external environment? So, an external environment is a group of factors or conditions that are outside the organization but affect in some extent. So, in business, this term commonly applies to elements related to out of control dimensions such as society, economy, regulations, and political system. So, what are the external environment of schools? So, here are some. Uh, Here is a structure about a school district. So, external environment. So what are the external environment of schools? So some example of this includes social matters such as fights, student suicide, personal matters, and poor academic performance. However, political and economic issues such as board elections and mismanagement of school funds are also included in possible external issues. So what do you mean by school accountability? So literally, the process by which students, teachers, and administrators give an account of their progress. Accountability is a means by which policymakers in the state and district levels and parents and taxpayers monitor the performance of students and schools. So as what you've seen in the structure, so school district is been surrounded by taxpayers, unions, parents, college, universities, regulatory agencies, legislatures, accrediting agencies, cultural values, and this is selected external influences and constituencies of a school district. So how do you show accountability at school? So here are six strategies for promoting accountability in school. So create a culture of trust and responsibility. Set high standards and clear expectations. Give students ownership of the learning process. Help students learn to self-assess their work. Connect to the classroom, to the home. And what what are the importance of accountability in education? So educational accountability enhances teaching and learning in the school system. It forestalls the misuse of public funds and facilities. Accountability in the school system also when enhances the realization of institutional objectives. So there are two general forms of environment. First is the resource dependence framework, and the second is the institutional theory. So, what is meant by resource dependence? So, what is resource dependence? Resource dependence is when one organization has to rely on another organization for a resource. These resources can be for things as obvious as financing or as subtle as recognition. Though through this resource dependence, the organization with the resources is given influence and power over the organization without the resource. For example, an organic grocery store can only purchase organic tomatoes from one local farm because the farm knows it is the only local source of organic tomatoes. It pressures the organic grocery store to also sell their bell peppers. The organic grocery store decides to sell the bell peppers even though they are more expensive than organic bell peppers other farms because they need to sell tomatoes in their store. So the concept comes from the resource dependent theory of Pfeffer and Salancich in 2003, which was developed in the late 1970s. Under this theory, resources and power are linked and can explain the behavior of organizations. The great thing about resource dependence theory is what intuitively makes sense. We have all witnessed people bow to pressure from someone who they need something from. This is what the mafia movies are all about, as what you've seen in the mafia movies. So, and the same can happen to organizations. So, how does resource dependency affect organizations dealing with sustainability issues? So organizations working with sustainability issues often have more resource dependency than most. This is because they often are focused on issues of sustainability rather than pure economic success. This opens them up to having to rely upon others for resources. So a major source of resource dependence for sustainability organization is local government, which often provides the necessary financing for those organizations to begin their work. So this is often the case for community-based initiatives, which have previously been a focus on this blog. So the problem with organizations dealing with sustainability issues having so much resource dependence is what it impacts their work. So this is because the organizations with the resources often make demands before handing over the resource. This can hurt the sustainability organization. For example, uh, a government agency might make being nonprofit a requirement for getting up a particular type of grant. A sustainability organization may have originally planned to try gain money through commercial success, but finding it difficult to raise the initial money needed might change its activities so that it can meet the requirements of a nonprofit and have access to this funding. So what does this mean for a transition? So let's go to the transition. Okay, so it is clear that resource dependence causes some organizations to have power over others, and sustainability organizations are particularly vulnerable to the resource dependence, which impacts their work. So how does this impact transitions? So, well, if the sustainability organizations have to change the type of work they are doing, and the ways which they can change are unpredictable, but that is a topic for another post, this can impact the way they can contribute to a transition. For example, if an organization had planned on being a food cooperative, but in order to get startup funding had to become a company, to be a company requires certain types of reporting and hierarchical organizational structures, which tends to alienate volunteer workers. The organization had relied upon the volunteer labor to get its work done, and even with the startup funding, cannot afford to hire workers. So through discouraging volunteers, becoming a company has hindered the ability of the organization to get work done, thus leaving it wounded in its ability to contribute to a transition. So what is to be done? What is to be done about it? Sustainability organizations have tried for a multitude of different things to reduce their resource dependence. There are organizations which have been managed to avoid resource dependence by avoiding relying upon other organizations for resources. However, the downside can be that lack of resources also hinders their work in its own uh, way if they are unable to achieve their goals. Alternatively, some organizations collect fees from their members, effectively giving their members the power rather than an outside work they wish to accomplish. So, resource dependence framework. The environment is a place to gain scarce resources for operating the organization. So there are types of resources. It's either simple or complex. The fiscal, the personnel, information, and products and services. So availability of resources. So, resource dependence perspective, the resource continuum, there is a scarcity and there is a magnificence. In scarcity, competition for resources is fierce, zero-sum game, limited to basic academic and extracurricular programming. While in the magnificence, survival is easy, pursue wide-ranging goals, abundant curricular and extracurricular programs. So in school, what are the available resources? So this includes school furniture, equipment, technology, curriculum materials, manipulatives, textbooks, and any other materials within the school. Financial resources include cash and lines of credit. So what are the importance of school resources? So the rule of resources is to provide a source of learning experience for our learners, assisting the process of interaction between students and teachers during the teaching learning process. At the same time, they help students to learn and increase their experience meeting different learning needs. So, scarcity, let's define scarcity. As we all know that scarcity of resources arises when the resources or means to fulfill an end are either limited or costly. So scarcity is an economic problem. It calls for the economic allocation of scarce resources to fulfill unlimited wants or needs. So what is an example of scarcity of resources? So absolute scarcity examples include coal is used to create energy, uling, coal. So the limited amount of this resource that can be mined is an example of scarcity. So a day was an absolute scarcity of time, as you cannot add more than 24 hours it to supply. So those without access to clean water experience as scarcity of water. So there are two types of scarcity resources. So there are two types of scarcity resources: the relative and the absolute scarcity. So let's move to magnificence. So what does magnificent mean, or environmental magnificence? So environmental magnificence refers to the availability of resources in the environment. That's according to Dest and Beard in 1984. So and has been linked theoretically and empirically to perform the firm performance. Firms in highly magnificent environments usually have more strategic options than firms facing resource constraints. So, minimizing external effects. Internal coping strategies. There are buffering, planning and forecasting, boundary spanning, deducting, and representing. So, what best describes internal coping strategies? So, problem solving. Humor and relaxation are internal coping strategies, while seeking support from other is external. So, what are internal coping mechanisms? So image is solved for detecting internal coping strategies. So coping mechanisms are the strategies people often use in the face of stress and or trauma to help manage painful or difficult emotions. So let's go back to internal coping strategies. Let's start first with buffering. So buffering, according to one conceptualization, term the buffering model, resources and adaptive coping strategies protect or buffer the individual from the adverse effects of stress, thus their effects. So second one is the planning and forecasting. So planning and forecasting. So planning is the process of thinking about the future course or action in advance, while whereas forecasting is predicting future performance of the organization on the basis of past and present performance and data. Boundary spanning. So, what is boundary spanning? Boundary spanning is a term to describe individuals within an innovation system who have or adapt the role of linking the organization's internal networks with external sources of information. So, detecting, discover or identify the presence of existence. So representing, the last one, is be entitled or appointed to act or speak for someone, especially in an official capacity. So adjusting internal operations, minimizing external effects. So there is a structure, and it is classified in an environmental change, the stable one and the unstable one. And it is classified in mechanic and organic. And as what you can see in the structure, it is an opposite with each other. So, minimizing external effects. Inter-organizational coping strategies. The partnerships, the cooptation, the political lobbying, and the pooling resources. So, inter-organizational coping strategies. So, increasingly, organizations choose to develop their strategy collaboratively with others' organization, which is known as inter-organizational strategizing. These new forms of collaboration are quite remarkable, not less because they seem to gain to against much of the traditional strategy research. That's according to Barney in 2001, which puts a premium on inimitability. So partnership. So partnership is working with each other. So marriage is an example of a partnership. So cooptation. In the context of business organizations, cooptation refers to the process of adding members to a group, project, or a committee. While political lobbying means communicating with any official in the legislative or executive branch for the purpose of attempting to influence legislative or administrative action or a ballot issue, while pooling resources is to combine more than one person's supplies of something, such as money. If we pool our resources, we can buy the car. So, so what does accountability in school mean? So, I already give you the definition, the definition of what does accountability in school means. So, as what I've said, that literally the process by which students, teachers, and administrators give an account of their progress. Accountability is a means by which policymakers at the state and district levels and parents and taxpayers monitor the performance of students and schools. So, institutional theory. So, institutional theory, more or less agreed upon set of rules, symbolic and cultural in nature, conformity, diversity, and stability. So, conformity. So, what do you mean by the word conformity? So, let's first start with the institution. So, what is a institutional theory? Or institutions are social structures that have attained a high degree of resilience. So, let's go back to conformity. So, conformity is the process whereby people change their beliefs, attitudes, actions, or perceptions to more closely match those held by groups to which they belong or want to belong, or by groups whose approval they desire. So, coercive, government mandates and inducements. Imitative, totally quality management, black scheduling, and normative, professional codes across organizations. So, what do you mean by coercive? So, coercive, in a simple definition, coercive is something related to the act of convincing someone through threats. So, imitative. So, imitative is copying or following a model or example. And normative is establishing, relating to, or deriving from a standard or norm. So adapting to external environments. So buffering strategies, decoupling strategies, and managing the image. So in boundary spanning strategies, there is a categorical conformity, structural conformity, and procedural conformity. So what is a decoupling strategies? So to those not in the know, decoupling is using different suppliers for your marketing, communications, creative, and production needs, rather than placing your eggs in an often expensive single agency basket. Decoupling thus takes place when different assets classes that typically rise and fall together. So, example of that is our price hike of gasoline. There is a rise and fall together. So managing the image. So image management is all about respect, respect for self, respect for others, and respect for occasions, roles, and goals. And so accountability based on three underlying principles. There is a build capacity for delivering improved education, higher standards of performance, and increase and quality and quantity of outcomes. So accountability plans components, the standards, the tests, and the consequences. So federal reform initiatives. So federal reform initiatives. So there are the example of that is the race to the top and the no child left behind. So Campbell's law. So in Campbell's law is the observation that once metric has been identified uh, as a primary indicator for success, its ability to accurately measure success tends to be compromised. So the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decisions making, the more it will distort and corrupt the very social process uh, it is intended to monitor. That is Campbell's law. So guides to practice. So keep organizational structure flexible, nature healthy relationship with local groups and agencies, develop internal and external coping strategies, and be open to constructive changes. So I hope you learn and you listen to my report this afternoon, and thank you and have a nice day. That could be all.